Hello, I'm Steph from My Driver Classic, and today I'm down at the Great British Car Journey in Derbyshire. Now, as part of the attraction here, they've got something called Drive Dad's Car, and they have a fleet of vehicles that you can take out and you can take for a test drive, including a Land Rover that you might be able to hear in the background. And they had all the cars out this morning. They had the Granada, which we tested, and a couple of other vehicles that we've taken out before. And this beautiful Sierra Sapphire was sitting there. And I said, is she booked out? And they said, no. And I said, well, I was actually going to take out something totally different, but this caught my eye because I feel like we talked about this in the Granada video. There's a lot of love given to the hot hatches, the fast Fords, but what about humble cars like the Sierra that were once everywhere, but now you just don't see them anymore? So in today's video, we're taking this 2-litre Sierra Sapphire out for a drive. We're going to talk to you about the history, get up close and personal with her, and I'm going to give you a bit of a taste of what it's like. But remember, if you watch this video and think, I'd quite like to drive that too, all the details are in the description box below. Right, quick sponsor message and then we're going to head out in this Sierra Sapphire. Life's too short to drive something boring, so make sure you do something about it this year. I would begin your journey on the Bidding Classics Auctions website. They've got some fantastic cars up for grabs. They've got everything from pre-war stuff right through to the 90s and early 2000s stuff, with an incredible mix of different marques, models and price brackets as well. Now, let's get back to that video and I'll show you what we're doing today. The Ford Sierra came to market as a medium to large family-sized car, which was useful for families, travelling business folk and fleet buyers as well. And it had come in to replace the Ford Cortina MK4. It was debuted in 1982, and it was debuted to some suspicion because it was very different to the outgoing model of the Cortina, which was very squarely 70s in its design. This was a little bit more jelly mould, and people didn't entirely buy into that at first, because whilst it might have been a wary first meeting, buyers did actually quite like it. And in West Germany, where it replaced the Taunus, it was achieving treble the amount of sales that the Taunus had been hitting for the last few years of availability. And in Britain, it was similarly well liked. And in her heyday, it was, well, I've seen two different answers to this. Some people say it was Britain's best-selling car, and some people say it was Britain's second best-selling car. But hey, it was in the top two anyway. And even in the second to last year of sales, which was 1992, the car was still in Britain's top 5 best sellers, which is pretty good going for a car of that age. Now, the car boasted a drag coefficient of 0.34, which exceeded the Cortina's 0.45. And there were little details that they'd done on this to achieve this. So they took out the conventional rain guttering and they put in concealed channels. And you might be wondering, if you don't know much about drag coefficient, why they did this. Well, it boosts things like the petrol consumption, so you get a better MPG, and it was also said to be so good that it kind of stepped in and made up for the fact that they didn't have that V6 engine, allegedly. But again, things like that really appealed to someone who's doing all those miles across the motorway. However, the car had a lot more than that to offer the discerning buyer. And for the Sapphire buyer, and I picked up a brochure which was around the year or two out from this particular model we're testing here today, there's a lot you get as standard. So you get an attractive range of colours, 14-inch wheels, yep, that is a noted plus point in the brochure, 4-door operated courtesy light with delay function, variable interval intermittent wipers. This might seem so basic to us now, but it was a really big thing then. The electric windows, which is something I'm going to rave about later and something I really wasn't expecting. A choice of engines including the 1.6, the 1.8, which I think was the most popular, the 2-litre or the 2.3-litre diesel. And that's just on these models, just on the Sierra Sapphire for this year. I know that if you look at the Sierra across the entire range, you do get a lot more engine options. The 60/40 split fold rear seat, manufacturers loved bigging this up back in the day. You see loads of people do this. Austin Rover used to do it in brochures as well. The tilt or slide sunroof, the radio cassette with 6 speakers and an aerial, which is built into that back window, plus a whole host of exciting optional extras. So you could go things like metallic paint, which is an absolute pig if you need to touch it in, heated front screen and electronically controlled anti-lock braking system. The Sierra Sapphire we're testing here today had what Ford dubbed at the time their powerful new 2-litre engine. The engine was the double overhead cam engine, and it was paired with the MT75 5-speed manual transmission, which had a key upsell, which was apparently synchro on reverse. I didn't know that was going to be such a big deal. The combo was said to bring new levels of smoothness and drivability to the car. The new engine was available on both carb and EFI, and it was looking to the future because it was set to run on unleaded as standard, because at this time leaded petrol was very much still available but being cast out of forecourts. In addition to this, Ford engineered the suspension to provide, in their own words, a class-leading combo of ride comfort, confident road holding and crisp handling. And how did they do this, you ask? Well, they created a fully independent suspension with front layout which incorporated a stabiliser bar, which then reduced the car's body inclination to roll when cornering. And the rear suspension was fitted to a subframe with rubber mounting points to reduce noise and vibration. We talked later on of Ford's commitment to safety with their glass etching when buying from a Ford dealer, but did you know they also installed high security locks on the Sierra? Now, the locks were fitted to the doors, boot, fuel filler cap and steering column, in addition to the motorised central locking. It was said to be more difficult to pick than a standardised lock, and the cars were issued with keys which were difficult to copy and a mechanism which was less likely to freeze. Now, this might seem like a rather hollow boast, but remember, even as late as the 70s, cars were still being sold by manufacturers with keys which were so generic and had a code etched on that you could essentially just call your auto factor, reel off the code, and they'd have another set over to you in 15 minutes. The idea of your key being unique and hard to copy was relatively novel and quite exciting. But all good things come to an end, and the car was replaced by the Mondeo, another Ford big hitter which finished production last year in 2022. It might not be a sports car or a luxury barge, but I think that we can all agree that the Sierra is a car which really shouldn't be discounted from automotive history. Now let's have a better look at that dash. It's a really strange sensation being inside the Sierra, but allow me to explain what I mean by that. So a lot of people talk to me, a lot of people that tend to be older, say to me when they get into a Morris Minor, they're like, oh, it's that smell, it's that memory. And I don't really have that firsthand because I didn't have anybody in my family with an older car. However, when I get into this, it was really strange because there's a smell inside this Sierra, and I got in and I was like, oh my God, that's childhood. You know when you get in and just something really reminds you? And it's really taken me back to being picked up, you know, by parents of friends when you're a child, or being taken from A to B. My granddad had one. People had them as first cars because by that point, like when I was growing up, people had them as first cars because, you know, it might be someone's parent or grandparent was finally trading the car in, and it was kind of rock bottom price and it finally gave somebody a bit of freedom. So for me, there's a lot of memories and there's a lot of sentiment attached to this. But it's a very strange feeling. But I imagine that there's a car that you have in your life that you know exactly what I'm talking about. And I guess that's one of the really nice things about Drive Dad's car, is you could jump in something like this and it is a bit of a serotonin hit where you're like, oh, that's a nice memory. But today is my first day as a driver in the driving seat. I've never sat in the driving seat of one of these. And it's a really nice sensation. I feel quite at home. And one of the things that jumped out at me is when you look at the Sierra from the outside, even though it was very good for its time, it had incredible coefficient drag, it had things like the high security locks on the outside. For this generation as well, it was in the 1989 brochure that if you bought one of these from a Ford dealership, as standard, as part of Ford's commitment to safety and security, they used to etch your number plate onto all the glass and I think the light lenses as well. So I don't know, it's a strange one. From the outside, it just appears like normal street furniture to me. But coming inside, and one of the first things that jumps out at me is that even though I would consider Ford kind of an ordinary everyday brand, the quality inside here has held up quite well compared to things like the Bluebird or the Montego, cars that it probably would have been pitching against at one point, or really certainly this point, there would have been buyers with both those cars in mind. You tend to get in some of the Montegos, for example, and things feel a wee bit tinny. Whereas even when you come inside here, like things like the glove box, for example, you open that up and yes, it is that brittle coloured plastic like you expect from this sort of car, but when it shuts, it doesn't flex. It's all very nice and it's really well proportioned inside as well. It's not just a shallow tray that you can just shut up. Now coming into the centre, again, you've got plenty of space and things are proportioned quite well. You've got your air vents to the top, coming down into your clock, and a space here. I imagine something would have sat here. I'm not sure what. I'm sure you could have paid extra. Now, one of the things I do like is do you remember when we were looking at the Granada, I complained that the clock was way over here? The way that this is slightly angled means that you get a nice view of the clock. Although I will say that because it's a digi display and it's quite hot inside, it has dimmed it off, but very small complaint indeed. Coming down from there, we come down into a beautiful Ford radio, which I believe is probably of its time. I don't think it's something that's been put in afterwards. And then again, another cubby hole, coming down into an ashtray and a cigar lighter. All very straightforward, and again, all very straightforward in front of us as well. It's all just very pleasingly robust, and I wish that you could be here sitting with me and I could say to you, oh, have a feel of that, have a feel of that. You don't always get that in cars this era. Sometimes you get into stuff and you think, crikey, if I turn that dial too hard, that's going to snap off in my hand. And you feel slightly on edge throughout an entire test drive. So talking about what we've got in front of us on the dash, we've got the rev counter, we've got fuel gauge, petrol gauge, selection of warning lights, over to the right hand side where we've got a speedo and a trip clock. Coming across from that, you've got your dial to control the wiper speed, and over on the right hand side you've just got a panel for things like your fog lights and heated screen. Coming down from there, now this for me is something I did not expect until I did a bit of quick pre-reading over lunch, was that I didn't expect to see electric windows. And I got in and I thought, yeah, that's fantastic. Again, when you look at the competition, they're not doing that sort of thing. Now this one we're testing here today, as I've mentioned already, is the 2 litre. The most popular, I believe, across the range on these was the 1.8 litre. So I imagine this is going to have some absolute poke to it. And we've got a 5-speed box, which I think was standard across these. Now the only other very, very small complaint that I have to make is because when you push the clutch, it goes very deep into the carpet. I've had to adjust my seat forward pretty much as far as it will go, which means that this armrest here, which by the way has got tape holders in, a very nice touch, is no longer useful to me because my arm sits here and this is sitting all the way back here. So for me, one of the things that the Granada did very well was this was extended, so wherever you were sitting or wherever your seat positioning was, this armrest was of use to you. For me, this is of no use at all. But again, these are very, very small points for what is a car, in my opinion, that's held up very well through the cruel passing of time. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour through the dash. I will say as well that one of the things that, if you are a music aficionado, is it's got 6 speakers throughout on this, which actually is great because it means that if you look at some of the competition cars, so the things that would have been pegged up against, they just have the speakers in the front. And you know what? That seems like such a small thing on paper. But when you're road tripping with your friends and you all want to enjoy a song together, there's nothing more excruciating than being plonked in the back and having to lean forward to listen to Now That's What I Call 17. All your friends can hear it fine in the front, but you've only got a distant memory of the music in the back, and if the speakers are racked right up, you end up with distortion. So again, just a few small nice touches that just add to the driver and the passenger experience. So I'll get it started up for you. Now, even though we've got the sunroof open, we've got the doors, all the doors have got windows open because it is about 30 degrees, it's boiling. It's very quiet in here, isn't it? That's the joy about cars from this era, they are actually quiet inside. Have a listen for the back and then I'll take you out for a little drive. Right, let's go on an adventure. Now I have a really weird question for you all at home. Have you ever got into a car, let's give this mini away, and thought to yourself, this is a really weird sensation because it feels like I've driven this car a million times before, but you've never driven it. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because that's exactly how I feel with this particular car, and it is the strangest sensation that I cannot explain properly. It's almost like deja vu, but with driving. I feel immediately at home. It's one of the easiest things I've ever driven, and I've driven quite a lot actually. I'm in a great position in that two of the competitor cars, which are a Montego I've driven Montego, Maestro and Bluebird all quite extensively. So for someone who was looking for a medium to large family size car, and they were looking at something like this against those, I tell you now, this is what I would have picked every single time, and I imagine many people did, because even though it could be quite unassuming from the outside, it's absolutely winning it when you get in. It handles like a dream. So as you can see, as we come round, it's all very straightforward. Again, you've got all the information and the education that they've learned. We've talked about the coefficient drag, we talked about that steering, we talked about the suspension on it. All of that comes with you and you feel it as you drive. And again, remember that Ford were designing now really for a worldwide market when they looked at their cars. And so the great thing about this is I would say that it feels not anonymous, but it feels like it's not being aimed at any one particular market. It feels like a comfy pair of shoes that anybody could pop on and feel quite at home in. It's an easy car to drive. The great thing is even though I don't benefit from this armrest, which is a bit of a crying shame, by the way that I'm positioned, I've got my mirrors aligned, I can see to the end of the bonnet, the seat is in exactly the right position. Again, just like that Granada and just like other Fords that we've taken out recently, everything really is within a fingertips reach. This slight slanting of this panel here means that you get great visibility, you're not having to reach round. Oh, it is just an absolute dream. Again, in a way like the Granada, I didn't expect to really fall for that. I certainly, because the 80s and 90s really isn't my favourite era, I didn't expect to get into a Sierra today and think, well, I didn't expect to see a Sierra today or to pick it over something from the 60s, but this has really won hearts and minds. It's such a little dream to drive. Now the great thing with this is it's from that era that if you see something like this and you see a Sierra and you think, oh, I quite fancy one of those for going out in regularly, the great thing about this is that it's very much a classic that you can drive all the time. Because things like, if you go out in a 60s car, sometimes you have a lot of things as standard that mean that you are going to have to either adapt to your driving style or perhaps modernise to bring it up to speed with modern times. But something like this, you've got the 2-litre engine which goes like the absolute clappers. You've got silly little things like the brakes on this, it's discs to front, drums to rear, but the back drums are ventilated. So it's just all these little things that are within this, and the comfort and everything within this makes it such a practical choice for if you were looking for a more modern classic to drive. I'm really, really taken with it. I think it's just really jolly, really good fun. I would absolutely love, and I shouldn't say this, should I, but I would love to just rag it down the motorway, because I can tell it's got so much get up and go. And whilst it's fantastic that you can take them out like this on Drive Dad's car, I would so love to do 70 in it and see what she's capable, especially with all the wind whistling through that sunroof and through the windows. Oh, what a fantastic afternoon it's been. So what would my criticisms be? What would they be? Well, for me, it's not my favourite era styling wise, but that is a personal preference. I think of the 80s cars, people get very hung up on things like hot hatches or iconic designs, but actually, why not have a look at a Sierra? Because it's so much more comfortable, and that boot space to the back, you've got 14.6 cubic litres of space to chuck all your stuff into. It is such a handy, usable car. So I guess that's my takeaway really, is that I don't really have much negativity about it. Preference wise, styling, it's not my era, but that's by the by. Judging the car on its own merit within its own time frame, it's a great car, it's robust, the quality is there, the comfort is there, and it's something that you could use, enjoy and take out on a regular basis. Now if you've watched this video and you've thought, oh, I'd quite like to try a Sierra as well, don't forget we've got Drive Dad's car, all the details are in the description box below. So it's goodbye from me for now, but also massive thank you to the team at Great British Car Journey who let me change my mind this morning and be swayed by a Sierra. So until next week when we're looking at something else, and we've got a fair few Ford bits and pieces lined up, so if you are a Ford fan, make sure you are pressing that subscribe button. So until next week, take care and drive safely.